Hey YouTube, this is Archangel for Truth, and today I have an interesting topic for you. Today my topic for you is pertaining to the three-pronged judicial, I like to call it bait and switch, the courts use to allow states to violate your rights and freedoms. But basically, this test it's referred to as the three levels of scrutiny that judges use. And so, basically, I wanted to explain this. But before I get into all of that, I want to clarify that this is not legal advice, and that I am not a licensed attorney. However, what I am doing here is explaining my understanding of this scrutiny test that they have, and why I disagree with it, and why you might want to disagree with it also. But nevertheless, regardless of how we disagree with it, this is the test that the Judiciary will use to justify the state violating your constitutional rights. And so let's get into it. And by the way, I want to wish everybody a happy new year. I hope that this year is going to be a better one for everyone. With that being said, we should basically start off by explaining these different levels of scrutiny that are used. So, basically, the way this allegedly works is that whenever you want to challenge a law established by the state, and I use that word loosely because basically what it boils down to is, they're giving what is called deference, not difference, but deference, in behalf of the state. So what's happening is they've come up with this little shell game, and that's what why I put this picture before you, because basically what it is a way to get around the Constitution, and that's what they're doing with this. So basically what happens is, when the constitutionality of a law is being challenged, regardless if it's, state or federal courts, they all commonly will apply one of these three levels of judicial scrutiny from what they call the spectrum of scrutiny. And so the highest level is called strict scrutiny. Then the next level would be intermediate scrutiny. And then, of course, the easiest one that they always pretty much will go to is what they call rational basis review. So these level of scrutinies that applies basically determines also how a court will go about analyzing a law and its effects, basically. It is also determines, which party the challenger of or the government is going to be the one to have to challenge the constitutionality of whatever things you're wishing to challenge, that the state or the federal government is enforcing. So with strict scrutiny, of course, That's the highest bar. That is the one where, whether it's a state and whether or not it's the federal government, that is where the burden is going to fall upon the government, whichever form that is. But when you get below that level of scrutiny, basically what's going to happen is the burden is going to fall upon you. So as regards to the strict scrutiny, as I said, this is the highest level of scrutiny applied by the courts to government actions or laws. The U.S. Supreme Court has determined that legislation or government actions that discriminate on the basis of race or national origin or like religion and alienage, like your status, whether you're from a different land or not, must pass this level of scrutiny to survive a challenge that the policy violates. So, what would be the example, I guess, that you would apply this for? So, let's say, for example, you got a ticket for not having your seatbelt while traveling or driving, okay? But you want to challenge that, the question of whether or not you have a right, to travel or drive without a seatbelt. Okay. So basically, you're going to be asserting, you're going to be what it's called is applying a as applied challenge to the constitutionality of the seatbelt law. Okay? And so you're going to have to basically show why it is that this seatbelt law is unconstitutional. Now, this is where the judge will come in and do this little shell game. So you have to understand that what the courts are doing is they are only focusing on what they call fundamental rights. Now, why that is important for you to understand is because basically what it boils down to is the court is assuming that fundamental rights are only those rights that are specifically mentioned by the Constitution. Okay? But here's the problem with that. Because the Ninth Amendment in the Bill of Rights clearly stipulates that we, the people, have what is called unenumerated rights. And that these rights should not be denied or disparaged. But that is exactly what they're doing by setting up this premise of what they call fundamental rights. Now, you have to understand the trick of the game that the courts are applying here. Because what it is doing, what the judiciary are doing are basically, when they're trying to determine what your rights are, they are exceeding their judicial power. Okay? The judiciary is not, their power is not to determine what rights are under the Constitution, okay? Their purpose, and as so described by Mr. John Marshall himself in his opinion, that the duty of the courts is to interpret law. That is a difference between interpreting what law is, legislative law that the legislative has established, interpreting that, compared to their determining what our rights are. That is not their duty, regardless, even if it's a Supreme Court. That is not their authority. Okay? But nevertheless, the courts use this shell game, this three-pronged level of scrutiny to determine, whether or not, one, is this a fundamental right you're contesting? Okay? Now, is there in the Constitution a fundamental right, as they would call it, to drive or travel without a seatbelt? Is that a fundamental right? Well, the legalists and the attorneys would all tell you, oh no, that's you don't have that right. Well, hold on a minute. The question as it pertains to a seatbelt is, do you have a right to do things that may be unsafe? Is that a right? And certainly, there are many activities that would entail, like skydiving or, various types of sports, extreme sports. So you see how all of a sudden the question that the state is trying to enforce as pertaining to seatbelts is one that they're already assuming that you don't have that fundamental right, or they're calling the fundamental right the priority, whereas it would fall under the Ninth Amendment Unenumerated Rights, which that's what it is. You have a right to do things that are considered by others to be dangerous or risky or so forth. You have that right. And so back to, I'm sorry if I got off on a tangent there, but basically the courts, when they're going to apply this strict scrutiny, as I said, it's the high level of scrutiny. It is applied whenever a fundamental right is being threatened by a law. Okay? So you have to understand that this level of scrutiny is one that the courts will require the government to prove that, they passed this smell test, if you will, on this one. Now, but even if they pass that one, or even, if they don't pass that one, guess what? It doesn't matter, because then, if they don't pass that one, they have another level of scrutiny. Okay, so you see where we're going with this. We found that the government, we lifted the shell of strict scrutiny, and we found out that they didn't have a right to do that. But guess what? Now we have another shell we could look under, another means to get around the constitutionality or the rights of the people, rights and freedoms of the people. And so, since the government didn't pass strict scrutiny, we're going to go to the next level, which is intermediate. So, what is the intermediate level of scrutiny? Well, basically, the next level of scrutiny is where the judicial focus on a challenged law is basically less demanding than the strict scrutiny in order for the law to pass intermediate scrutiny. So you have to understand that this test was only adopted by the Supreme Court back in the 70s, okay? I'm not sure exactly where in the 70s, but I know it was somewhere in the 70s that they established that. And basically, the way they applied that is to be used whenever a law discriminates based upon gender or sex or some federal, like appellate courts and state Supreme Courts. They've also applied this level of scrutiny to cases involving things like even a person's sexual orientation, if you want to go there. But as with the strict scrutiny, intermediate scrutiny also places the burden on the government. So there is a burden on the government, but it's a far less burden that is being required. And so think of it from this standpoint. The intermediate scrutiny, basically, it's going to determine whether or not the government, whether it be the state or the federal, has an important objective, if you will. And that objective is substantially going to be related to their achieving that objective, okay? So basically, the state or the government or the federal government, they say, for example, well, we need to have this law in effect as it pertains to seatbelts. And I'm just using seatbelts as an example, because it's going to ensure safety, okay? And that is their objective. For a safety reason, they're going to require this. And so they're going to, basically they're going to look at that and they're going to say, well, does this have an important governmental objective? Is it important for the government to cover this? Well, safety is important, don't get me wrong. And certainly, we should be safe whenever possible. I'm not saying that there's a problem with being safe. The problem is when the government, tries to require you to be safe in every circumstance and situation. So there again, that's part of the problem. So now we're down to the rational basis review. And, this is the lowest level of scrutiny that, is applied to challenging, the constitutionality of the laws. And basically very little is required for the government to be able to pass this very low standard. And when this standard is being applied, the person challenging the law is the one that's going to have to prove, that there is no rational basis for it. So is there a rational basis for, seatbelts? Sure, why not? I'll give them that. People that are involved in auto accidents will more likely survive. If they wear a seatbelt. Okay, but the problem is requiring people to have a seatbelt, denying them of a right that they have to do. Now you got to understand, you know, what we're talking about here, and this is where the courts mess up completely, is what is the purpose of government? Is the purpose of government, to keep us safe in every circumstance? Is that really what the government was established for? Or was the government established for the purpose of protecting our rights? See, that really is what the founders or the framers of this nation were focused on, is the protection of rights. They weren't seeking a government to involve itself in every aspect of our activity. No, that is not what they were seeking to establish, but that is exactly what we have today, is a government that has far exceeded the intent and expressed views of the framers of this nation to basically protect our rights, to one where they now are regulating our rights. You don't see that anywhere in the Declaration of Independence. You don't even see it in the Bill of Rights. So the whole premise is a false premise, which they're getting away with. So, basically, the question as it pertains to rational basis is the government has no legitimate interest in the law or the policy. Now, how does the government, really, how does the government benefit at all by our wearing a seatbelt? Where is the benefit for the government? Well, I'll tell you. But before that, the other question is, as it pertains to rational basis review, is there is no reasonable rational link between the interest and the challenged law. Okay, so now I've explained the test for the rational basis review and the things that the government is going to require of you, or the judiciary is going to require of you, that you prove that the government has no legitimate interest, one, and that there's no reasonable rational link between the interest and the challenged law. Okay, so that's the rational basis review right there. So now, let us ask the question: what does it benefit the government? I'm not talking about the people, but the government, to require people to wear a seatbelt. So this is where you have to understand the nature of the beast, and it is the beast because, we won't get into that, but maybe I will in another video. But at any rate, what you have here is you have insurance companies that go to the state legislatures and say, hey, we want you to require people to wear seatbelts, because guess what? If they wear seatbelts, then we don't have to pay out as much for damages when there's an auto accident. You see that? So now the state is, and by the way, we're gonna give you a little money here on the side if you do this for us. And so the state or the federal government, the legislature, the senators, all them, they're like, oh, well, if you're going to pad my pocket with dollar bills. Well, hey, let me go ahead and, we'll go ahead and establish that, and we'll say we're doing it for a safety reason. Okay? And then, for those who don't follow it, guess what? We're going to build revenue for the state or for the federal government, so those that don't follow it are going to have to pay us as well. You see how this works? It's all a shell game, okay? The only question that should arise is the government's law or regulation or statute or whatever it is that they're trying to push, is there a violation to the people's rights? And if there is, that should be enough right out the door, okay? So, now, how does this apply to, like, for example, a constitutional right? So I'm going to use, for an example, the Second Amendment, okay? Second Amendment says that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Pretty plain and simple, clear as can be. Shall not be infringed. Well, now, with this rational basis review, this is where they skirt your constitutional rights and say, well, now, we're going to respond to a mass shooting, and we're going to say, we're going to outlaw a certain type of gun because now we have a safety issue as which we can apply to get around that. So now, whereas before, the Constitution is basically saying it shall not be infringed, now we have a rational basis why we can infringe it, you see? So your rights, when it boils down to it, are very unprotected by this three-pronged judicial bait and switch that the courts use to allow states to violate your rights, or, the federal government for that matter. So I wanted to explain that, for a lot of you who don't understand, may not understand the three-pronged game that they're playing here, okay? So it's important for us to understand what the process is of the judiciary, even though we don't agree with it, okay? It's important for us to understand what they're doing, so we can strategize how to address that. So, understand this is going to be the method that they use when you're challenging the constitutionality of a law. And in that case, as I mentioned before, that is being pertained to what the courts are referring to as fundamental rights. Well, who gets to decide what our fundamental rights are? According to the judiciary, they think they can, even though there's nothing in the Constitution that gives them that authority, and that is certainly not the authority of the judiciary. So with that, I'm going to leave it here. I'm sorry I haven't been able to get any videos out. I've been pretty sick. I had to, I was hospitalized for well over 2 weeks, and still having some health issues as a result, and trying to get those resolved and taken care of. So, but with that, I again wish everyone a Happy New Year. Please like and share this. I don't do many videos because, well, I don't get very much reaction. So, if you like this, well, it's not so much of a video, more as a recording. But if you like it, give me a little love, okay? And if you don't like it, that's okay. I have my haters just like everybody else. It's all good. I don't hate anybody, but whatever. At any rate, God bless everybody. And I just want to say, take care.